is got everything we need?
Yeah, we are set.
Okay, and we've got our quorum?
We do.
Okay, what we don't have is the agenda pulled up.
I could pull it up and share my screen.
Does that work, Kurt, or should I pull it up?
Everyone will go away.
Okay, Scott, I'll pull it
Yeah.
up because Kurt said if you do, then everybody's faces will go away, so. But go ahead and start talking and I'll do it while you talk.
Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and, Kurt, are we broadcasting yet?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chair, if it's okay with you, I'll read the introductory remarks for tonight's Zoom meeting. My name is Scott Wagner. I'm an analyst for the City Attorney's Office. Welcome to the November 9th meeting of the Lawrence Human Relations Commission. I'm going to provide a few procedural reminders for the virtual meeting tonight. The meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. Please remember to state your name every time you speak for the benefit of those listening remotely. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute yourself. For those using Zoom, on your screen, you'll see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. Board members and city staff members, you must state your name and your title each time you speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, the chair will call on the board members individually to provide their vote. Madam Chair, you will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. When public comment is sought on an item, individuals participating via Zoom should raise your hand in the feature. Individuals will be called upon by name in the order they appear on the meeting host screen. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The chair will then call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options. Staff present will direct you to the podium to speak following social distancing and safety protocols. The regular 3-minute time limit will apply. And that concludes our Open Meetings Act announcements for tonight.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for doing that introduction. Next, we will have roll call of commissioners. Commissioner Pryor, Commissioner Dahl, Commissioner Falls,
Present.
Commissioner Sellers, present, Commissioner Logan,
Present.
Commissioner Bluxom,
Present.
Commissioner Barnett, Commissioner Stevens,
Present.
Commissioner Coviello. So Scott, that gives us 5 commissioners present, and I do know you stated previously, according to ordinance, that a quorum is 7, and so we are not able to meet to discuss business. However, what our next steps would be, what would you advise our next steps to be at this time?
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst. No, our quorum is 5 for the Human Relations Commission chair. So we do have a quorum tonight, so we can go ahead and have our meeting.
Okay. Great. So
Chair Sellers, this is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. I thought we might just take a minute and I don't know that we officially called the meeting to order, so wanted to do that and just acknowledge that we're getting a little bit of a late start tonight because we bumped up against a PTAC meeting that ran all the way till 5:30. So if folks are tuning in and wondering why we're getting a late start, wanted to make sure we explain that to all of our many, many folks who I'm sure are watching us live as we speak.
okay. Thank you, Casey. So this is Vice Chair, Commissioner Amber Sellers, and we are now beginning the Human Relations Commission meeting, called to order at 5:45 p.m. So back to our agenda items for this evening. First is the approval of the minutes from our September 14th meeting. For those who are in attendance, our commissioners, you did receive those minutes prior to today's meeting. So if you could take a moment to review those minutes, let myself, Casey, or Scott know if there's any corrections or additions that need to be made to the minutes. Hearing no corrections needed to be made to the minutes, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
This is Commissioner Stevens. I motion to approve the minutes. I'll second that.
All right. The motion has been moved by Commissioner Stevens and second by Commissioner Falls. I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Falls?
Aye.
Commissioner Logan?
Aye.
Commissioner Bluxham?
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens?
Aye.
Commissioner Sellers? Aye. And the motion carries with a vote of 5-0. Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda item number 1, receive monthly case update report from City Prosecutor Elizabeth Hofoka. So Elizabeth, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Commissioner Sellers. This is, my name's Elizabeth Hofoka. I'm the supervising city prosecutor. And at each meeting, I give a case report update just to keep everyone informed of any cases that are currently open and being investigated, any cases that have been closed since the previous meeting, and then also some information about inquiries that our office received that did not have any sort of complaint filed. So since our last meeting, we had actually 2 cases resolved, so I need to make a bit of an adjustment. When I prepared this update, it was last week, and since I prepared it, we had another case get resolved. So currently we have 1 open investigation. It is an allegation of housing discrimination, and the basis is disability. And there were 2 cases closed since the October 19 meeting. 1 case was resolved by conciliation, which is an agreement between the parties. And the other case was a no probable cause finding. The inquiries that we received that were not discrimination related are described as follows. We had 1 caller reach out to us. She believed that her landlord should not be charging her money for anything outside of their contract or lease agreement. She did not believe it was related to discrimination, so we gave her information about getting in touch with housing and credit counseling, and also informed her she could contact a private attorney for assistance. We had another caller reach out because he has bed bugs, and the landlord was telling him that it's his responsibility to take care of the bed bug issue. We did refer that caller to housing and credit counseling. Another caller was calling us because her apartment was not wired correctly, and she was having a hard time connecting to Wi-Fi in order to work remotely. And we referred her to code enforcement to see if she could get further information about the wiring. And then finally, there was another caller that reached out to us because he was being evicted, but he believed that the notice that he received was not filled out correctly. And he was referred to housing and credit counseling. And if there are no questions, that's all that I have for the case report update.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hofoka, for that report. Do we have any questions or comments from any commissioners present today? All right, if not, thank you again. We'll move on to our next item on the agenda. Item number 2. Elections for chair and vice chair. So well, I got not to say recently, I guess we do know recently, Scott was updated that Commissioner Pryor was no longer able to serve as chair of the Human Relations Commission and actually had to step down. his position as chair. And so in that event, we need to hold elections for the chair and vice chair position. As you can see, we have 5 of our 8 remaining commissioners here today. And so, Scott, as far as we do have quorum, but I'm thinking as far as opening up discussion for this, do we need to have a motion to do chairs, or can we simply have discussion on the matter prior to electing chairs and a vice chair?
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst. Yes, you can have discussion. One option might be to postpone elections until December, which you certainly have the authority to do when you will hopefully have more of your commission present, or you can go ahead and move forward with elections tonight.
Right. Thank you, Scott. So that would be my recommendation for everyone. Seeing that we are missing a few people, and I did see several head nods. I know that's going to make our December meeting pretty heavy, but that at least gives everyone the opportunity to think about this and to bring forth several nominations for the 2 positions. So if there are no further discussion needed on this matter, if I could have a motion to table the election of the chair and vice chair to the December meeting. Hint, hint, kind of gave you your motion there.
This is Commissioner Stevens. I motion to table the elections until the December meeting.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second that. And I would
Thank
also like to make a caveat that Commissioner Sellers act, since you're vice chair, that you act as in the stead of the commissioner, or instead of in the stead of the chair, since the chair is no longer available during the interim.
Okay. So we have a friendly amendment to the motion that we table elections until the December meeting with Commissioner Sellers serving as chair in the interim. It's been moved. So, all right. Commissioner Falls,
Aye.
Commissioner Logan,
Aye.
Commissioner Bluxham,
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens,
Aye.
Commissioner Sellers, aye. Motion carries 5-0. All right. Next action item on the agenda is the approval of the Human Relations Outreach Plan for 2021 with enhancements. And I have Scott, you are presenting that agenda item to us.
This is Scott Wagner, analyst for the City Attorney's Office. That's correct. So at our last meeting, if you guys will recall, Elizabeth presented the findings from our HUD performance assessment report. And one of the action items to come out of that report was they wanted to see from the city kind of an enhanced outreach plan to hopefully inform the community of our human rights protections and to ultimately generate, more investigations and cases. So each year we prepare an outreach plan, and I've attached that with the agenda documents today. So I don't know if Kurt will be able to put that up on the screen or not, but you have that as part of your packet. We haven't really shared that before with the commission, so I'm kind of happy to share what we put together every year for our HUD grant. And I don't want to go into all the nitty-gritty details of the plan because we do have some other agenda items tonight, but I wanted to point out a couple items. So we receive a very small grant from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, each year to investigate and prosecute and to promote the work of the Human Relations Department. So this year, our HUD grant is in the amount of roughly $17,000. So it's not a big grant. And with HUD's PAR recommendations, they didn't exactly provide us with any more funding to produce more outreach. So, we're attempting to provide as much outreach as we can with the resources we have. And so with that in mind, I'll just kind of highlight a couple of the additional items that staff has put together that we think we can pull off during this next year. Again, noting kind of the limitations that we're in right now of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the first thing I wanted to kind of briefly talk about and share with the commission and get you all to thinking about tonight is 2021 will be the 60th anniversary of the Human Relations Commission. It was created in 1961. And today was actually the first day of our new Director of Diversity Inclusion, and we hope to have him as part of our meeting in December. But, you know, I think this is something to be celebrated, and we need to think about how we want to celebrate this fact in 2021. You know, this body was one of the first human rights entities citywide in Lawrence. And I think we have an opportunity to publicize the fact that you guys are still here. We're still enforcing the civil rights protections of Lawrence, and it's something to be very proud of, and to educate the Lawrence community on what the Human Relations Commission is all about. So I've added that as part of our enhanced planning. Commissioner Barnett is not on the call tonight, but earlier this summer, she had suggested and had contacted a former complainant that had a case actually prosecuted into district court on behalf of the Human Relations Commission to see if that person would be willing to be interviewed as to, you know, how the process works, how it affected her life, and she agreed to do that. And so I've already kind of drafted a script, and I think we can produce probably in-house a nice educational video with that person, and to promote the work of the commission as well. A couple other highlights, and we'll probably have this on the December agenda because we need to start talking about it. If you may recall, and some of you are new to the commission, the group that was called the Lawrence Alliance was disbanded a couple years ago, and this body took on the functions of the Lawrence Alliance. And one of the key things that they pulled off every year was this event called the Festival of Cultures. We had it scheduled for September of this year, and due to COVID, the initial planning work that a subcommittee of the commission had started to work on, it didn't move forward, and we had to cancel the event. But it is a kind of a large undertaking. It's I know a couple of our commissioners on the call have been at the event in the past and participated in it, but I would describe it as a multicultural educational event in Lawrence that was pretty successful in the past. But if this body is going to take it on in 2021, assuming that we can go back to seeing each other in person in 2021, then we really need to start planning for that and kind of get back a subcommittee to work on that again. And I would point out that we did receive about $10,000 last year from HUD for some special enhancement activities, and we included funding for the Festival of Cultures in our grant proposal. So we do have some funds to work on that event in 2021. Aside from that is just our kind of yearly list of things that I do on behalf of the commission and our commissioners, you know, when we're meeting in person, staff tables at different events, and help promote the work of the commission. So I won't go through all those line items, but I think I'll just, well, I did add Commissioner Logan to the Juneteenth event, hoping we could set up a table for that event at South Park. So he had emailed me earlier asking some details about that event. So traditionally, the Human Relations Commission has staff tables at community events to promote the work of the commission. So that would be a good opportunity. But I think I'll stop at that point and see if the commission has any questions.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for that presentation. Commissioners, do we have any questions or comments for Scott in regards to the information that was shared with us on the outreach plan? Scott, as we get closer to these events, I know you said that the budgets, is there any way for the commissioners to provide input as far as budgets, vendors that will be used? Do we have any documentation as far as the Festival of Cultures, how that event was put together, so that I'm assuming more than likely at maybe our December or January meeting, we would need to start looking at creating a subcommittee for that?
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst again. Yes, we received some information from the Lawrence Alliance. We had put together an initial budget for the event. So there was a subcommittee of Commissioner Dahl and Commissioner Martha Taylor, and I believe one other commissioner had started to work on it. So, and we received some information from the Lawrence Alliance, and several of their former board members agreed to help plan the event. So I think we just need to kind of pick up where we left off.
Okay. All right. This is Commissioner Sellers. Any other commissioners have any questions or comments for Scott on this?
This is Commissioner Stevens. I was just wondering, since we had money allotted for the Festival of Cultures this year and we're in a pandemic, I was wondering if we could be thinking for the December meeting whether we could reallocate some of those funds for assistance for individuals in the community who are struggling with housing or things like that as a result of COVID. Thanks.
You bring up a good question. This is Commissioner Sellers. You bring up a good question, Commissioner Stevens. So is there opportunities this year to reallocate any of the HUD funding that was not utilized for projects this year? Or can we repurpose those funds? And if so, how could we do that?
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst again. I would need to check in with HUD before the next meeting on that, since we had a specific grant proposal that was submitted to them. Staff could also provide an update on the CARES Act funding that has been allocated to Douglas County and the city of Lawrence in support of keeping people in their homes. The city of Lawrence also received a substantial allocation for a utility billing assistance program that I think I sent out that information to commissioners. So we could provide an update at the next meeting on that.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you, Scott, on that. And as far as the CARES Act funding for housing and rental assistance and also for the utility, was there I haven't been on social media in a while for specific reasons, but was there any type of small social media blip that went out on the city's website, like social media pages, that could be shared with the commissioners that we can share with our networks?
This is Scott Wagner again. Casey may be able to answer that better, but I know the city issued a press release with our utility billing assistance program. I believe we sent some information out definitely to the commissioners on the state of Kansas program as well.
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. Scott, I would add that I believe we did post on social media about the city accepting applications for utility billing assistance for city utilities. So I'll certainly go back and see if I can find that post and forward that information to the commissioners.
Right.
And I think it is also on the city's utility billing landing page on the web, but I'll confirm that and let you all, I can follow up and let you all know that as well.
Thank you, Casey. This is Commissioner Sellers. I'm going to say yes, because the applications for housing assistance that's being done with CARES Act, that's being operated on the state level. So there's a specific page, if I'm not correct, that it's not being handled on a local county level. It's being directed more from the application state level, right?
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Vice Chair Sellers. the State Housing Corporation is administering that program. I think they did provide information to the city and ask us to get it out through our networks. So I think we have also posted on our social media about that program just to help spread the word. But again, I'll make sure to include that information in a follow-up email to all of you commissioners.
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst again. There was also a local program that I gave you an update on, I believe, at our August meeting, and they received CARES Act funding. It was a coalition of tenants to homeowners and Family Promise. They received a substantial allocation of CARES Act funds to provide local assistance here in Douglas County. And I could get an update on that for a December meeting as well.
Yes, this is Commissioner Sellers. I think that would be excellent so that we know if we're need. 'Cause I just know based on the information I'm hearing, as far as utilization of money, CARES Act money that has gone out and CARES Act money that has been utilized, and with us not knowing if the federal government is going to push back that deadline to exhaust those funds by December 31st, if we know that
Good point.
there's going to be a use it or lose it mechanism there. I would like for us to be able to maximize that in the best ways possible, and also have our commissioners thinking about ways that we can, opportunities that we can see that money being used and make those, submit those recommendations to the city commissioners. All right.
This is Scott Wagner again, on a legal analyst. On a somewhat related note, a story did appear in the Journal World last week that the city has opened our sanctioned houselessness campsite project at a park near Lawrence Memorial Hospital. And so I know the first houseless persons were accepted into that camp last week. So that's an active partnership between the city and community providers at Burt Nash to get those people not into permanent campsites, but into permanent housing. So that program has started.
Yes. And I do remember that, this is Commissioner Sellers, I do remember that report. So if there's opportunities there for us to even utilize CARES Act money there, I think these are all ideas that we can continue to float around and until we know for sure what the direction the SPARK committee on the state level is going to do. So, all right, good discussion, everyone. I think it's good to have these discussions, to be mindful of the different mechanisms of where funding comes from and how we can utilize it to expand on the scope of the work that we do here on the Human Relations Commission. So next on the agenda item, we have approval. Nope, we already did that. Receive presentation from, I want to make sure I get this right because he even gave me the phonetic spelling of it, Evan Korynta. Yay. Thanks, Evan. So receive our presentation from Evan Korynta, the ADA Compliance Manager for the City of Lawrence. So thank you, Evan, for joining us this evening.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, so let me know if you can see it.
Good, Kurt?
Yes.
This is Commissioner Sellers. We can see your screen, Evan.
Okay. All right. All right, well, once again, my name is Evan Korynta, and I am the ADA Compliance Manager for the City of Lawrence. So tonight, I just want to discuss a brief overview of the ADA, my role as the ADA Compliance Manager for the city, and then also the City of Lawrence's ADA transition plan. So the Americans with Disability Act, it was the most comprehensive disability rights legislation in history. And although it wasn't the first, it was definitely the most comprehensive. It provided the most protection against discrimination for people with disabilities. And it was signed into law in July 26th of 1990. So we recently had our 30-year celebration of the ADA. So So who is protected under the ADA? So individuals with physical or mental impairments that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So this could include walking, standing, hearing, seeing, etc. And then in 2008, when the ADA Amendments Act was passed, they actually broadened that, and they also included bodily functions in there as well, such as cardiovascular, endocrine, neurological, intestinal, digestional. So that was, that was big. That happened in 2008 because it really broadened that definition. It also includes individuals with a history or a record of disability. So for instance, this may be somebody who has chronic illness that doesn't always have flare-ups, and at the time when they're feeling good and feeling healthy, they don't have any limitations to major life functions. But kind of when they're having flare-ups or some chronic issues, they may experience those disabilities. It also could encompass somebody who had a previous cancer diagnosis, and maybe they've been in remission for 5 years now, and but they're still getting kind of overlooked at work, because their employer is worried that, hey, what if their cancer comes back, and I'd hate to give them this promotion and then they're not available for it. It also covers individuals regarded or perceived to have a disability. So this could be somebody that has maybe significant burns or a scar, and although it doesn't pose any limitation to a major life function, they would still be protected under the ADA as being perceived or regarded to have a disability. So the role of an ADA compliance manager, so one of the things that, is really big in kind of what I do is it really focuses on Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is state and local government. So as far as my scope or jurisdiction, if you will, it really only covers city services, facilities, and programs. So, unfortunately, it doesn't, if somebody calls me and they have a restaurant downtown, or they're a hotel or one of our hospitals, unfortunately, that's all public accommodation side. So that's not really in the scope of my work. It really is focused on cities, services, facilities, and programs. One of the major functions of an ADA compliance manager, or sometimes they're called ADA coordinators, is to conduct self-evaluations or audits of your city and create a citywide transition plan. And this was asked of municipalities shortly after the passing of the ADA. So after the ADA was passed, they said, take a couple years, take a look at everything that you have, do an audit of it, and anything that's not accessible, let's transition that into accessibility. So that's kind of where the term comes from, the ADA transition plan. And I'll actually be talking a little bit more about the transition plan here in a minute. Some of the other roles are plan and coordinate compliance efforts. So if there's a project where we know we're going to be adding some accessibility features to actually kind of help with that step-by-step process and make sure kind of the project encompasses the accessibility that we were looking for. Establish a formal grievance procedure, which the city has. We actually have on our city website under the accessibility tab. There's a way to do a formal grievance. There's also ways to contact me if you don't want to do a grievance. You just have a question or concern. There's always that avenue as well. Investigate any complaints that come up. So sometimes we will get stuff that comes through on either our Lawrence Listen or through our website. They have a question about something in the community. So I'll reach back out to them and see, if it is a city service or facility or program, or if it's kind of something without or something outside of that scope. And if that's the case, then I could maybe refer them to code compliance or hook them up with other resources in the community. Some other items, coordinate requests for any auxiliary aids or reasonable accommodations or modifications. So if somebody comes into one of our facilities and they need a sign language interpreter, I can help coordinate that with either the department or the staff to make sure that we have an interpreter on hand. Or if there's a modification to a policy or practice, a really good example of a practice that's been modified in our city, and this happens in a lot of communities where trash service, if somebody with a mobility device or a physical disability is unable to get their trash cart down to the curb, they can actually, fill out a form to get a special request to have, that cart picked up from, door side or what have you, and brought back. So there's different modifications that you can make to policies and procedures as well that are kind of in the realm of the ADA compliance manager. Train and educate staff, boards and commission and community. So I'm always trying to work on different ways to educate our staff and really just, try to look at different ways that we can make our community as inclusive and accessible as possible. It's doing things like this, talking to different boards or advisory committees that we have in the city, talking about ADA requirements, and just really kind of shining a spotlight on the disability community. It often is forgotten, and just to kind of have somebody there to say, hey, before we kind of move ahead with this, let's look at some of the ADA implications with this, and then be a resource for our community. Like I had mentioned, although my scope is really city services and facilities, if a business calls me and they want some advice on the best ways or best practices to make their business as accessible as possible, I can kind of tell them, hey, this is what the ADA says. Here are some good resources if you're looking to, do X, Y, and Z. So anytime I have an opportunity to make something more accessible in our community, I want to jump at that. So now it talks a little bit about the City of Lawrence's ADA transition plan. And this is what I've been with the city for a year now in this role. And this is what I spend a majority of my time working on. And again, a little bit more about our transition plan is we have a current transition plan that was adopted in the early 90s. It's a great transition plan. But since kind of bringing me on board and with some changes that were made to the ADA standards in 2010, as well as a bigger emphasis on public right-of-way, we thought it would be a great time to take a look at our transition plan and kind of update that and get that kind of headed into the future with this. So the things that we're doing right now are reevaluation. So we're taking a look at all of our facilities across the city that we own or operate, and checking, do they have any physical barriers to access? We're also looking at all the city services and programs that we provide, working with our staff to make sure that, if we're doing a program or offering a service, are there alternatives? Are there alternate formats? Are there different ways that we could do this to make sure that they're as accessible as possible if somebody were to request that? And just really doing a thorough audit of our city programs, services, and facilities. We're also gathering community participation and feedback. So we had a citywide accessibility survey that was through the Lawrence Listens page. And we got a great feedback from that on just different, a wide variety of different accessibility issues throughout town that people could list, and kind of priorities in the city. I've also reached out to multiple disability organizations here in town. So I'm, in constant contact with them and working with them on different disability concerns. Then another component of the ADA transition plan is any modification to non-structural barriers. So as I'm out doing these facility surveys, or, looking at the services we provide, if I see something that's, it's not structural in nature, so we're not going to have to come in and do demolition and build something new. If it's just a modification to, maybe we need more Braille signage at one of our facilities, or again, we need to change the way that we provide a service. That's something that we can tackle right away. We don't have to kind of prioritize that out over years and years like we would, on something that's maybe larger or structural in nature. Then a huge part of it too is the prioritization plan. So after we're done with kind of the auditing of all these things, we're going to sit down and we're going to say, okay, well, what kind of needs to be the top tier items? So these are high use, high traffic areas in town. If we're looking at facilities, maybe we're looking at City Hall or Sports Pavilion Lawrence or the airport, or things that get a lot of high use, high traffic areas. And something like maybe some of our wastewater plants that, are typically kind of employee only, maybe they're farther down on the list if they had an accessibility issue. And then the implementation piece, obviously that's very important as well, where we'll actually be, again, kind of from start to finish, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do it right? And kind of following along, that way we can make sure that we're doing exactly what we kind of intended to do and make sure that we're kind of covering all of our bases. And then ongoing monitoring. I mean, I think that's an important piece of any plan. We want to make sure that at least annually we're updating the community and the commission on things that we set out to do in X, Y, and Z year, and this is where we're at. And the nice thing is a lot of the stuff that we're already finding has already been incorporated into other departments' plans for the near future and their CIP plans. So some of the stuff that we're identifying are things that they've already identified and targeted as well. So I think that's really good that they're, kind of jumping ahead, and hopefully by the time we present the transition plan for facilities, services, and programs in the spring of 2022, we'll already have a lot of these things addressed. Like I mentioned, we're also responsible for the public right-of-way, and that transition plan will be its own separate transition plan because, we have a lot in the rise for sidewalks, cuts, things like that. That'll take a little longer to gather some of that data. And that will actually be presented to the commission in the spring of 2023. So we're kind of working on both those plans at the same time, but there's kind of so much data there. And then lastly, just, taking a team approach. This was a social media post that we had a couple weeks ago that I myself am an individual with a disability, and I use a wheelchair in my daily life. So here's a picture of me actually with some of our city inspectors and engineers on some different curb ramps that were recently installed. And these gentlemen specifically are guys that I've worked with on some other really tricky areas in town, and we've had to kind of get creative on the best way to provide ADA access. And I just said, what would you guys think about me bringing one of my extra wheelchairs along, and we can actually have you guys feel the difference between something that's a little bit higher slope and lower slope. And they were all for it. And I thought that was a really, really good opportunity, not only for them just to feel the difference between, again, using these curb ramps for somebody that's walking versus somebody that's rolling. I think it's you get a different sense of access when, you're talking figures or numbers or slopes or percentages than when you can actually feel it and see kind of what those differences can make. I think it can go a long way. And again, the nice thing about that demonstration is it was almost just as educational for me because I got to talk to them and talk about the difficulties that they face in the field. I mean, things that they have to look out for, terrain, landscape, how things drain. I mean, these are all things that they're having to kind of adjust in the field and do on the fly. And so I think kind of having that collaborative approach to accessibility in our community is going to go a long way. And, I hope that we continue to kind of work across different departments on trying to make, our city as accessible and inclusive as possible. So any questions or anything anybody had?
Thank you, Evan, for that presentation. This is Commissioner Sellers. As far as the transition plan, how often does the city look at updating this? And do you feel like we do an adequate job of reviewing this transition plan?
Good question. Evan Korynta, City ADA Compliance Manager. It's really weird. The ADA didn't give any specifications on how often a plan had to be updated or anything like that. They just said that you had to have one. So ours hasn't had a thorough reevaluation probably since the mid-90s as far as facilities go. I mean, as far as practices, programs, services that we provide, a lot of those have changed over the years than what we were providing in the early 90s. But some of the facilities that, we're still using, for instance, City Hall, I mean, that really hasn't changed a whole lot. The one piece that has changed is some of the specifications that the ADA is requiring now for facilities and alterations and new construction. So some of those have changed. So that's why we thought it would be a really good time to kind of update our transition plan. And like I mentioned, the public right-of-way stuff, it wasn't a huge emphasis in the early 90s. It was kind of something that got added in the last 10 years where there was a kind of a more of an emphasis and actual guidance on public right-of-way stuff. So I think that's a good time to kind of update all this.
Yep.
This is
Thank you.
Commissioner Bloxham. This is Commissioner Bloxham. Evan, thank you for that presentation and thank you for your time putting it together. There was something specific that you had mentioned about how people file complaints
Mhm.
with your body. And sometimes they you don't have jurisdiction over those because you're really over the city.
Mhm.
You had mentioned that in that case you would reach out to other agencies, and I'm just wondering if part of that process could be referring those complaints to this body.
Evan Korynta, ADA Compliance Manager. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Again, depending on the nature of what that complaint is, I think there would be obviously some major crossover, which I think could be a benefit. Some of that stuff, tends to be, when they're looking at specifications for handrails or things like that, where it can be, it's kind of universal, even though I don't have kind of jurisdiction over that. A grab bar height is a grab bar height, whether it's a restaurant, a hotel, or a city facility. So some of those overlap, but yeah, definitely. There's also some, we're lucky to have a local disability resource center here in Lawrence as well that I know that I work with regularly. So anytime there's an opportunity to get people more information on access and accessibility, I'm all for it. And I think that would be a great idea to have some crossover.
Agreed. Thank you. One second question again, Commissioner Bloxham here.
Commissioner Bloxham, before you ask your question, this is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. Evan, could you stop sharing your screen so we can see?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Commissioner Bloxham, take it away.
Commissioner Bloxham again. The other part of something that I've noticed, and I know in past commissions we've talked about and may have even had you come present before, was the idea that under disability that would cover mental disability and how we could work together as a community. Even our two operations work together to improve especially housing for members of or citizens of this community that suffer from mental illness. And I know that we talked about really heavy a long time ago and there were projects underway, but I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about that and maybe your involvement with anything that you've done with other organizations for fair housing for individuals and access to fair accommodations even for individuals that struggle with mental illness or a mental disability.
Yeah, so I haven't presented to the Human Relations Commission before. Like I said, I've only been here since last October, so I've been doing ADA for the city for about a year. And before that, I spent 11 and a half years at a disability rights and advocacy center in Topeka. And again, it's kind of one of those unique things where there is some overlap, and obviously when we're looking at disability as far as the services, programs, and activities we provide, we have to take into account all disabilities. We don't get to pick and choose physical disabilities or blind or hearing or people with mental health issues. But again, fair housing, it becomes kind of a unique situation because again, that's not really the scope of the city, because a lot of times fair housing is public accommodation. So that's Title III, or, it could be private housing. But I do think that there is an opportunity, to make sure that we as a city, not necessarily myself, but working with different people in the city to make sure that we are looking at all disabilities when we're looking at discrimination. And you're right. I mean, public housing or housing for people with disabilities it's not specific to Lawrence. I mean, it's a lot of communities. It's difficult to find, a lot of good housing options for people with disabilities. There's just, there's not a ton of it. I wish that weren't the case, but yeah, I mean, any opportunity for me to provide any help or, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you again. I really appreciate you being here. This is Commissioner Bloxham. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Commissioners, do we have any other questions for Mr. Korynta? Seeing none, again, thank you, Evan, for being here and for providing that presentation. And we look forward to seeing that transition plan here in the coming months or so.
Thank you.
All right, commissioners, next on our agenda, our final item, under agenda items, that is the update on our Kiosk Project. And so I will be providing everyone with an update on that. And luckily, we do have Commissioner Bluxham here, who also served on the subcommittee with Commissioner Barnett, putting the questions together for the kiosk. So just to give everyone, for those listening or watching, some context, we did start this conversation back in October in regards to the work that the mayor and the city commissioners were wanting to accomplish with the unrest of racial inequities and addressing those issues in the city. And then in August, I presented the commission with the idea of utilizing a service through KU to do a survey to at least provide some type of foundational information to capture some of the voices of the community in regards to several pillars that we looked at: health and safety, education, housing, and economic opportunities. And since we were charged as a commission to do some community engagement in some capacity, knowing that Zoom can only give us so much, and with our numbers being so erratic with COVID, in-person opportunities being very limited, and not wanting to put anyone in harm's way. Since then, Scott and Casey have been working with representatives from KU CPPR to work out some of the contractor memorandum agreement for the use of these kiosks, as well as assisting the subcommittee in developing questions to be utilized. So with that, where we stand is Scott did provide commissioners with the draft questions that the subcommittee came up with that would be presented to the city commissioners for approval. But we wanted to be able to provide the commissioners with the opportunity to review those questions, to provide input, corrections, anything of that nature before we get this quickly turned over to the city commissioners for their meeting tomorrow. I did have a meeting with one of the representatives from KU today to get some more context as far as us getting this project going. We are utilizing the kiosk for free, so there is no cost to this to the city. This is a layover that we are being able to utilize for another state agency whose project was cut short due to COVID, and so the KU CPPR has access to these kiosks until December 31st. So the goal is to get the questions approved, uploaded, and start deploying these kiosks out into the community by December to give us 30 days to do this project. We have at our disposal 8 of these items to use. So there is some opportunity there for the commission to be intentional about suggesting priority areas for us to place these kiosks. In addition to having an in-person item to utilize to take the survey, there's also a QR code that can be accessed that individuals can access to take questions. What the limitation to that QR code is that it's only in sequence with the questions. So if we have a question on the kiosk for 2 days, a person that uses the QR code can't advance and see the other questions. They only see the questions that are available for that day. So it's almost like you would have to scan the kiosk every other day, or how often we would schedule those questions to be updated to answer those questions. Scott and Casey had recommended to remedy that by utilizing the city's Lawrence Listen platform for individuals who would like to take the survey questions in full. We would have that opportunity. We'd have that option available to us as well. So I'm going to pause for a moment because that was a lot of information to see if we have any questions from commissioners who are on tonight's call. Commissioner Bluxham, if there's anything you wanted to add, and then we'll transition into a quick update from Casey in regards to where we stand with the contract with KU. So do you have any questions or comments from commissioners here on the call? I will take silence that you are in full agreement with what the questions that were presented and that you were just enamored by the work that Commissioner Barnett, Bluxham, and myself have done. And we appreciate that. Casey, this is again, Commissioner Sellers, my apology. Was there anything you wanted to add to that? Thank you for putting those up. I will say, we do have quite a few questions. That was one of the comments that KU made. Since we're working with roughly a 30-day timeline, and there's roughly 22 questions on here. If there are questions, commissioners, that you truly feel like should be the core questions that we ask on, that we utilize, then I would ask that you provide those comments back to Scott or Casey, and Scott and Casey, you could tell me if that's correct, how that should be handled. Because I'm fearful that giving these questions only one day will not give us the feedback that we would necessarily, it would not be fruitful feedback. And so Katie was saying with KU that we may suggest teasing this down to maybe 8 to 12 questions, which gives us, so then we can utilize the questions be on the kiosk for several days and do that. And then we could offer with the Lawrence Listen platform, we can actually have all the questions listed. And then we could do some comparative analysis between the questions that were answered on the Lawrence Listen platform with the kiosk as well, and then have that additional data as well. But I think what's important is that and we don't have the time and capacity to do it during the meeting, but at least if commissioners could look over this list and send Casey or Scott, send Scott your picks for maybe 8 to 12, at max 12 questions that we feel like we can load into the system.
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. I might suggest, I know we want to be sensitive to the time, but I might suggest that we do have some discussion about kind of agreeing on what those 8 or 12 questions might be. If those of you who are present here think that that's the approach rather than having 21, I think ideally we would leave tonight with you all in agreement about what the priority questions are, so that, and this kind of blends into the update on the contract, so that when the contract goes back to the commission, it would go with the set of questions so that the city commission would see, here's the contract, sign this contract, here's the questions we're going to go out and start gathering answers to. So from my perspective, I think it would be helpful if you all have the time this evening to spend time discussing. One, if you think 21 questions versus 8 to 12 is, which one of those you think is the correct approach? And then if it's a smaller number of questions, what are the ones that you would prioritize? And again, I might suggest you do have them kind of grouped by those different categories. So maybe that would be a way to organize it where you could structure your conversations about, are you interested in one question from each category? Are you interested in focusing on one category and asking multiple questions? Those were just some things that I was going to offer up as suggestions to help you all facilitate your discussion. But obviously, it's up to you all, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Casey. This is Commissioner Sellers. So I would like to hear from the other commissioners, seeing that I served on the subcommittee. I think anything I say would be of bias, and I would like to hear from everyone and so that we can figure out how many questions we want to focus on and what questions that you feel like, as you glean through this list, that as you look through this list, you can glean which ones you feel like are most important. So I'm going to go on mute so I can hear from everyone else.
This is Commissioner Stevens. As a researcher and somebody that has I suppose, training in social welfare and social work, I think that in my experience in the field, what I do know is that people are much more likely to do something that has 8 to 10 questions rather than accurately answering or honestly answering a 21 question questionnaire. It doesn't have it's not a reflection on the work that anybody has done, but the reality is that everybody, especially these days, is having to move more, and so in understanding that, I would say that we would get better answers, I think, if there were less questions. That's just my thoughts.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. So in your background and in what you've experienced, what do you feel comfortable suggesting to the commission as being a number we should focus on as far as number of questions?
This is Commissioner Stevens. I think that we would have, I didn't quit saying I think. Yeah, in my experience, I was successful in questionnaires that range between 8 to 12 questions. Thank you.
Other commissioners' input as far as the number of questions that we would like to see on the survey? I at least would like for us to agree on a number.
Commissioner Logan here. If the data suggests that, people are more prone to answer a limited number as opposed to, more than 10, I should say, then we should look at the data and go with something that won't make the attention wane and, like you said, receive a bunch of filler answers and not the most honest, accurate portrayal of how people really feel and the questions they feel are relevant. So I'm all for a shortened list. And as mentioned before, not to belittle the effort it took to make this list, but a shorter list seems feasible.
Thank you, Commissioner Logan. This is Commissioner Sellers. So knowing that we may potentially have a timeline of 30 days to deploy this survey, and how it's set up is that the kiosk will only provide one question per day. And so on wherever those kiosks are, wherever someone is and they scan the QR code, it's almost like a question of the day. So the question for the day for December 1st through December 3rd would be whatever question we would want it to be. And then the question of the day for December 4th to maybe December 5th would be another question. So thinking in that capacity, do we think it would be smart to go with maybe 8 questions, and it allows you to be flexible to give some questions 3 to 4 days or 2 to 3 days to sit on the kiosk? Or do we want to do 10 questions where that equally gives a question 3 days to cycle through? Or do we want to go with something where it's 12 days and you're roughly looking at 2 days per question? So the lower number that we have, the more opportunity we have for that question to be on the kiosk for a longer period of time, with 10 questions being that sweet spot as far as equal, equality and equitability, that each question will have 3 days and it will rotate every 3 days with a new question.
This is Commissioner Stevens. It seems as though I put my foot in my mouth earlier. I think that because each question has like a certain allotted amount of days, as long as we're like putting them in spots where we will be getting the true pulse of the community's responses and answers, then I would be happy with, I would be in support of 10, like the 10 questions or something like that. But if we're putting these questions in neighborhoods that are very unlikely to experience marginalization, oppression, or things like that, then I don't think it's going to matter what we do, because we're going to get answers that skew the data from the realities of protected classes. Thank you.
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst. Just to add to that discussion and talking to Katie from KU, it's also possible for the city to tweet out or put on our social media platforms the QR code for the question of the day, and people can answer remotely wherever they are.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you for that, Scott. And you're correct, Commissioner Stevens. That was one of the discussion points we had in the subcommittee that was brought up, to ensure that we place the kiosk in densely populated areas, but also areas that would be able to provide intentional and authentic data. Not only just looking at traffic, but also looking at the population and being able to have a fair representation of the population here in Lawrence. So it sounds like to me that through general consensus, we feel like 10 questions would be ideal. All right. Casey, I'm looking at you out of the corner of my eye. I'm not sure, because as we're still processing this, will this officially need to be a motion, or can we just go on general consensus?
I think at this point, general consensus, Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager, I think general consensus at this point in the discussion is sufficient. If you all are going to go on and identify those questions, then at the end, I think we just would need a motion to say, these are the questions that the board recommends.
Okay.
Does that get at your question, Vice Chair?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so this Commissioner Sellers, so we are in agreement for 10 questions. That would potentially give us 3 days per question. And are we in agreement with that? I guess I would be cautious of that, because I want everyone to be able to look at the questions. So if we can kind of take a deeper dive into the questions, and I would like to hear from everyone as far as what questions they feel like should take precedence. Commissioner Stevens, sorry.
Yes, I just had this is Commissioner Stevens, sorry. I just had a question on, one of the things that's most important if we're going to give people equitable access to like the QR codes through Twitter or something like that, is oftentimes I think that things will get out more if they're sponsored. And I was wondering if we could use like funded tweets or things like that, sponsored ads for things like that. I was wondering if we could allocate some funds so that we could have these tweets or Facebook ads or things like that out and circulating, rather than getting lost in the algorithms. Thank you.
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. Commissioner Stevens, that's a great point. I will have to ask. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly follow up with our Porter Arneal, who you all have met before, who handles our social media, and see how we do that with those sponsored ads and posts. But great point, and I'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
This is Commissioner Bloxham. I was just wondering why we dig into this, because again, it's a lot to look at and break down. But as you were coming up with the number, I was writing down the number of areas that are represented in these questions. And currently we have 5. So if we had 10 questions, if we could use, we have 10 questions and 5 areas that the questions represent, perhaps we can have the commission narrow down to 2 each. It would just be, I think, maybe a good starting point to how to narrow our focus and make a decision. That's all.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Commissioner Bloxham, I think you bring up an excellent point to this. I mean, if everyone is in agreement with that, then just to simplify this process, and we want to pick 2 questions for each category, for each pillar, then we can go about it that way.
This is Commissioner Stevens. I was wondering, I don't know if we're trying to figure that out today, but I was wondering if we could, if at all possible, we could wait until the other commissioners are here, but I am also open to whatever, and I know that we're on a schedule. Thank you.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Commissioner Stevens, I think our next meeting's not until the 14th, and I know based on the timeline, the goal was to get this in front of the commissioners for a meeting in November so that we can deploy the kiosk in December, because we only have access to them until December 31st. So the goal was to at least give us a solid 30 days to pull it through. So I completely understand your sentiments as far as the timeline and turnover of getting this out quickly. So the fate of the universe rests on our shoulders tonight.
Scott, Joseph Falls, Commissioner here. Is it possible for you to send us out an email, basically a poll question, where we could rank our preferences, each commissioner individually rank our preferences for each category, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that data would be correlated and sent back to commissioners, so we can pick the top 2 from each category, or if there's an issue, maybe resolve it some other way. But I was wondering if that was possible.
Thank you, Commissioner Falls. This is Commissioner Sellers. I would have to look to Scott or Casey for guidance on that, as far as utilizing a survey mechanism to send out to commissioners to rank these.
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst. I don't believe we'd be able to utilize that methodology to poll commissioners. I can ask Maria Garcia to weigh in on that. But one idea I did have, if the full commission is generally in agreement with the list of questions that the subcommittee has come up with, then I think you could allocate authority to the subcommittee to propose a final list of questions to place on an agenda. If you trusted the subcommittee to hone in on this list of questions, that might be a possible way to wrap up the discussion tonight.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you, Scott.
This is Maria Garcia, Assistant City Attorney. Commissioner Falls, I don't know if what you were getting at was that you wanted commissioners to have some additional time to look through the questions and give a thoughtful evaluation of which questions you would want to see on the kiosk, but perhaps each commissioner could send an email individually to Scott with their selection, and then staff could create a chart out of that or some sort of a graph.
Commissioner Falls here. Ms. Garcia, thank you. That's kind of my idea, is we rank each one, and then that way the city could correlate or Scott could correlate the data and get it back to us on possibly what our preferences are.
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. Maria, if I could ask, are there open meetings?
Questions with that, as far as, that was I think where Scott was going, was if we poll the commissioners outside of this meeting, is that them in fact making a decision that's not happening in this open meeting?
I'm not sure if it's a decision that they're making. I see your point about, is it a meeting even though they're not collectively together? And I'm not sure if it would even be a serial communication or a serial meeting.
Sorry for the pop quiz.
Yeah, no, I see your point. I guess maybe Scott could get some limited information this evening and then create something. I guess what I was trying to propose was that if we can't do some sort of a survey outside, that maybe our office can help create a graphic. But I suppose that some information should be provided this evening, and then we can take that away and then work on something.
This is Commissioner Bloxham. I kind of see, so this is just, I'm just throwing this in the wind because I don't know if we're following the rules. But it would allow, if we gave a cutoff date until, one day from Wednesday, or like Wednesday of this week, and each commissioner send an email to one of the city staff with just our ranking. It would also allow the city commission to look at all of the questions in case they don't like the ones that we've chosen. Kind of maybe opens in an opportunity. This is what we think. These are what we think narrowed down the 8 questions should be, and then present that in a way to the city commission with backup. I mean, I don't know. It's just an idea of maybe meeting somewhere in the middle.
This is Scott Wagner again. Again, a possible idea is for the entire list of questions to be presented to the city commission, but again, rely on the subcommittee to hone in on the 10 questions or so that can realistically be put on the kiosk in the time allowed.
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager, and perhaps that subcommittee could be informed by the emails that Commissioner Bloxham is describing. If we send out, if we have this list of questions to all of you and you all send Scott back your ranking, then we can provide the ranked list to the subcommittee, and the subcommittee can make sure that they're okay with the ones that make up the final rankings. I don't know, there again, I'm trying to make sure that we're conducting business in an open way, but we have had the subcommittee working to this point, so I'm looking at Maria, and so far she's not shaking her head no, so.
No, that's fine. I was looking up an attorney general opinion about serial communications and was just able to confirm that if it's a staff person that's communicating with members of the board, then it does not become a meeting for purposes of Open Meeting Act. So as long as the commissioners are not CCing each other, the emails are, it's one person emailing Scott Wagner, for example, then it does not offend the act.
So this is Commissioner Sellers. So Casey and Scott, and thank you, Maria, for providing us with that context. So going what Scott said, could we go ahead and approve the questions as presented to be reviewed by the commissioners? And do we need to make a caveat to inform the city commissioners that our subcommittee will then whittle this list down, or how do we need to go about that?
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. I am going to suggest that it's a motion to approve the questions with the direction that the questions will be narrowed to 10 via a ranking system done by the commissioners, the Human Relations Commissioners. And then those recommended 10 questions will be forwarded to the City Commission. This is a long motion. It doesn't have to be all of this. But the intention would be that the recommended 10 questions would go to the City Commission along with this entire packet, so that, as Commissioner Bluxham described, if the city commission said, oh, we'd rather this question than that question, they'd have the ability to do that.
Okay, so we're looking at a potential motion to present the questions to the city commission with
The top
10 of the, with the top 10 questions will be utilized in the kiosk by ranked choice.
That would be a suggestion. Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager.
Okay. Suggestion of the motion? This is Commissioner Summers, by the way.
This is Commissioner Bloxham. I'm going to make a motion to approve all these questions that will then be to the City Commission and present to the City Commission with a narrow focus of 10, 2 being from each each area that they were asked.
Domain.
And done by ranking.
All right, this is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you. The motion's on the floor from Commissioner Bluxham. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Falls, I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Falls. Roll call vote. Commissioner Bluxham?
One more caveat. I just want to see if this needs to be in there because there's a time deadline. Do we need to amend this motion to include a time deadline that we were going to present or no?
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. I don't believe a timeline needs to be included. We can talk about the timeline for getting it to the commission after you all finish your motion and your voting.
Perfect. Aye.
All right. Commissioner Stevens?
Aye.
Commissioner Logan?
Aye.
Commissioner Falls?
Aye.
Commissioner Sellers is an aye. Motion carries with a vote of 5-0. So thank you, commissioners. So Scott, you will be, so is the plan, if to reiterate, is for commissioners to provide their choice back to you individually, and then you will share that information with the subcommittee?
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst. I believe I understood the plan to be that I would individually email out the questions, asking the commissioners to rank those, and staff will tabulate the results that we'll present to the full commission. I don't know that there's additional work needed by the subcommittee, but maybe I missed that.
Thank you. Commissioners, did you have any questions in regards to what Scott reiterated back to us? All right. We've now moved to
Vice Chair, this is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager, just to finish the thought about the timeline. So the contract still is in my ball. The ball is in my court on that. And so I'll try to work to get that. We are not probably going to have it, obviously, for tomorrow City Commission meeting. We can shoot to try to get it on possibly for next week. Otherwise, it would be on Tuesday, December 1st. So then if the contract could be signed on the 1st, in theory, we'd be able to start placing the kiosks. I think I do want to also acknowledge that there's probably some work that's going to need to be done on separate agreements between the city and the locations that we want to place the kiosks. I don't know exactly for sure, but if they're city facilities, that's not an issue. But if we want to say put one at Checkers grocery store, that may require a separate agreement. So just wanted to bring that up and see if, back to Commissioner Stevens' point about where the kiosks get placed, if you all want to weigh in and provide any discussion or direction on kind of the placement of those. I know Scott has had a few ideas that we've discussed about places to put them, but I want to provide the opportunity for you all to weigh in on that too. one last suggestion is maybe that is some additional work that the subcommittee might be able to do for you all.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you, Casey, for that. We did bring that up, but did not discuss that. So as far as locations, Scott, did you want to share some of the ideas you had? And then as far as us being able to have those discussions and providing that feedback to the subcommittee, what mechanism we would need to use to get that information to us?
This is Scott Wagner, legal analyst again. Sure, I had a brief conversation with Katie on locations. City staff has good relations, obviously, with the Lawrence Library. I have some good contacts with Lawrence Memorial Hospital. In terms of city facilities, the recreation centers are now open to the public. So those are geographically spread throughout the community. Those are some kind of quick and easy options that came to my mind. But again, I think some direction from the commission would be helpful as well.
This is Commissioner Sellers. Thank you, Scott, for that. I definitely, and I would like to hear from each commissioner. I know that when this project was done with KDHE, I know a kiosk was placed in the public health department. And so it would be great to see that we utilize that facility, in addition to LMH and the rec centers and the library. Again, we have 8 kiosks available to us to place across the city. So commissioners, are there any locations that come to attention that come to your mind that you would like to ensure has priority?
This is Commissioner Stevens. I would say that maybe the East Lawrence Center. And this is Commissioner Stevens again. And perhaps the, the high schools and, just schools in general, because I think that the kids' voices are super important.
Thank you for that input, Commissioner Stevens. This is Commissioner Sellers, by the way. Anyone else wanted to provide input in regards to locations? Casey, this is Commissioner Sellers. I know you brought up Checkers grocery store. Is that a location that the city has used in the past that they have a relationship that would make those initial conversations easier? Or are there other private locations that the city has relations with that we could consider?
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. Not that I'm aware of. The grocery store was one that came to my mind after a conversation I had previously had with Katie Hart at KU about kind of places that have high traffic. I think Commissioner Sellers, you're the one that mentioned, you want traffic so that people are coming by them. And geographically, I thought that was a grocery store in a part of town that was geographically made sense. But no, I don't believe we have that relationship. Like I said, I'm not sure that it would be that difficult. I just think after visiting with Katie at KU, if we were going to put them in places other than places that the city has control of, and the library is basically the same as the city. It's the city owns the library. So, hospital, pretty similar situation, health department, similar. So those kind of government facilities, I'm not that worried about, but private businesses I would be. But I just wanted to get clarity from you all about your expectations as far as those locations. So due to the timing, we may want to focus on things that are within our control, but I just want to be very intentional with you all, because I've heard from you the intention to put them in, Commissioner Stevens, I think, said, areas where they have experienced marginalization. And so I want to be sensitive that we're following through with that.
And this is Commissioner Sellers, and I do appreciate Commissioner Stevens bringing up the need to have youthful voices. So if we're able to get them in any of the schools, I think would be a step in an intentional direction made on our behalf to ensure that those voices are heard. So, are there any other comments from commissioners?
This is Commissioner Stevens. So sorry. Just one more. I think that it would be extremely important and valuable for us to have one of the kiosks in North Lawrence.
Any other comments? All right, so commissioners, this is Commissioner Sellers, by the way. I did make a note of all of the locations that were discussed, and we'll take this back to the subcommittee with Commissioner Bluxham and Commissioner Barnett, and we can share this information with Scott and Casey as far as areas to deploy the kiosk for this project. So thank you for your valuable input. We are now at public comments portion of tonight's meeting. So do we have anyone present for public comments? I know, Scott, you had mentioned, I do see we have Mr. Flowers here with us this evening. Mr. Flowers, were you wanting to provide any public comment?
Yes. Do I go ahead now?
Yes, sir, you have the floor.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna share some thoughts. It's not really anything that requires action right now, but I guess next meeting you guys were gonna look at a couple of ordinances, and I just wanted to share my thought is that when we come up with ordinances, it's always the prosecutors writing them. Like we don't have any public defenders that are also writing our ordinances. So basically all our ordinances are from a prosecutor's standpoint. And I just bring this up because when we talk about changing them or doing away with them, I just want y'all to remember that the prosecutors were the ones who put them in place to begin with. And I think that's going to be the city staff that's going to be working on the ordinances are going to be the prosecutors. So why are they going to want to, I think prosecutors, they're going to want these laws as broad as possible because that's what makes it easiest for them to win cases and such. So I just want you all to be aware of that. And also the whole, we never use it like a defense, like when talking about stuff like an ordinance, how, well, we never use it in a wrong way, so we don't need to change it since it's never being used in a wrong way. But I would say a reason like that should definitely be a reason it needs to be changed, because if it's never being used, then why should prosecutors care if it gets changed or not? They're going to use that whole, well, we never use it as a defense to not change it, but really they don't want to change because it's what's in place now is what's best for them. So I just wanted to share my thoughts about that. So thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Flowers, for sharing that public comment. You do pose some interesting questions in regards to writing of ordinances and regulations. As a regulation writer for the state of Kansas, I understand the process and the entail and how that goes about. So I'm glad that you shared that information. I did have on my notes this evening to remind commissioners of our homework for our December meeting. So I'm glad that you touched upon that in your comments. Does anyone have any context or follow-up that they want to offer Mr. Flowers in regards to his comments this evening? All right.
Commissioner Stevens, I just appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Commissioner Sellers. We do appreciate that. And leading into that, I will remind commissioners that for our December meeting, which is going to be power packed, so bring a snack and some water. We do have that it was brought to us to review chapter 10 of the city ordinance, and that we would have Tony Wheeler and Dr. Muhammad, who is our Director of Diversity and Equity with the city at that meeting to review the oversight and scope. And that also we are to be reviewing chapter 14, 14-412 and 14-602 in regards to any suggestions for renewed language or input in regards to the indecent exposure and public urination defecation ordinance that Mr. Flowers brought up at our last meeting, which was last month, but it felt like it was 2 weeks ago. So
Whoops.
it was quick. And then also that we are doing elections for our December meeting. So looking at our agenda, our calendar, again, our next meeting is December 14th. And are there any other items or comments from commissioners this evening? Scott, Casey?
Commissioner Bloxham here. I had a question in regards to all the follow-up. We're also going to get a report or discuss ways that, because we have been charged by HUD in violation, to improve. Was that on December or was that in January? I couldn't remember.
This is Casey Toomey, Assistant City Manager. That was on our agenda tonight. That was the
Agenda item that we discussed, number 3, approving the outreach plan. So that's the plan that we'll provide back to HUD for that outreach. Sorry if that wasn't clear earlier in the evening.
No, thank you. I understand now.
And this is Scott Wagner, legal analyst. Commissioner Bloxham, just to clarify, we were not found to be in violation of our HUD agreements. We were approved in our performance assessment report. They were just recommending some action items to really try to improve our case numbers.
Thank you for that.
All right. Are there any other questions, comments, or input from commissioners or the general public? All right. If you're hearing none, then I adjourn this meeting at 7:18 p.m.
Thank you, everybody. See you next month.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Have a good night.